What's going on, guys? It's Ben here, and I'm back today with another video. And today I'm going to be doing a video that I've really wanted to make for a long time, and I think it's more relevant now than ever. And that is about super teams, their origin, how they fit into the NBA today, and how they developed over the years, and how they evolved from what their first initial intention was to what teams such as the Warriors are today. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down what I consider to be a super team, the different ways that they've been built in the past, how they're being built now, and how it's changed over time, and talk about what it really means for the NBA, and give my opinion on whether it's good or bad for the league, the fans, the owners, the players, all that stuff. So I'm really excited, and let's get into it. So first off, I'm going to be talking about what I do consider a super team and what I don't consider a super team. So first off, a team like the Warriors today, yes, I do consider them a super team. The Heat in 2010 to 2014, yes. The Cavaliers in 2014 to 18, or until 17 when Kyrie left, yes. Those are kind of like the best examples I think of in modern times. Going back a little bit, the Big Three, eventually Big Four in Boston, I would consider a super team. The Lakers in around 2012 with Dwight Howard, Steve Nash, Pau Gasol, Ron Artest, and Kobe Bryant, I would consider that a super team. A few other examples would be maybe the Rockets in the 90s, and that's about it. So how I consider, what I define a super team as, is a team that acquires top flight talent such as basically all-star level players not through the draft. At least two of the three best players are acquired not through the draft. So for an example, when you take the Boston Celtics in 2007, when they acquired Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett, their top three players were Pierce, Garnett, and Ray Allen, and two of those three players were gotten through trades and not through the draft. Meaning that the team didn't grow it themselves. So like when people call the Boston Celtics of the 80s a super team, I get really annoyed because you look at their top three players, which are Bird, McHale, and Parrish, and then you can even throw in Danny Ainge and Dennis Johnson because they were a big part of that too. And two of their top three players, Larry Bird and McHale, who are actually the two best players, they drafted both of them. And Robert Parrish was actually a trade, but that was way early on in his career before he was a bona fide all-star. He was maybe a year into the league when he got traded, or even as a draft pick, I'm pretty sure. So I don't think that counts as a super team because they basically developed all those players on their own and picked them out themselves. Now, if you want to say that Dennis Johnson was the third best player on that team and not Robert Parrish, you'd have a little bit more of an argument because they acquired him, they didn't draft him, and I guess I'll give you that. And maybe you want to say, well, Bill Walton was a Hall of Famer and they got him, but Bill Walton was washed up by the time he was a Celtic. So I'm not going to define a team like that as a super team. Another common example that people talk about is the Spurs because they had so much talent at certain times. So like the Spurs of 2003 had David Robinson, Tim Duncan, Bruce Bowen, Manu Ginobili, and Tony Parker. But they drafted all of those guys except for Bruce Bowen, so I don't count that as a super team because, again, my definition is at least two of your best three players are acquired by means other than the draft. So to me that doesn't count because they drafted all those guys and developed them themselves. And that's not a super team. That's just a really well-built team. And until the Warriors acquired Kevin Durant, I put them in that category too because their top players were Steph, Clay, Draymond, and Harrison Barnes. And those four players were all drafted by the Warriors in 2009, 2011, and 2012. But when they got Durant, I think it changed a bit, but we'll get into that later. Another revision I'd want to make is, let's say a team such as the Warriors, I think because they have such good players, when you add the second best or arguably first best player in the game like Durant, I think that vaults them into super team category because that one player that they acquire can make them so astronomically better. Much like when the Cavs added just LeBron, even before the Kevin Love trade, you could arguably say that when they just had Kyrie Irving, Andrew Wiggins, and LeBron, that was going to be a super team because they only acquired one player in free agency, but that player was so good he was going to vault them into title contender status. But generally, I'd say it's a two-player addition, but there can be a one-player addition. But I generally say two, but it could be one as well. I keep reiterating that, but I just think it's an important point to get across. If it's a great player, it can just be one. But if it's just two all-star level players, I'd say it has to be two, not just one. Because if it, like, when the Chicago Bulls in 2010 added Carlos Boozer in free agency, I would not have called them a super team. Because although they had Derrick Rose, Kyle Korver, he doesn't count, but Derrick Rose, Luol Deng, Joakim Noah, and Carlos Boozer, that's four guys that have all played in the All-Star game, but I'm not going to count it as a super team because just adding Carlos Boozer isn't a big enough move to constitute that title. So how I'm going to do the majority of this video is I'm going to go throughout NBA history, talk a little bit about the first super teams and how they've changed over the years and how they've evolved from what they originally were to what they are now. So I would argue that the first super team incarnation was the Houston Rockets of the 1990s. This first team that I would say was when they had Hakeem and they traded for Clyde Drexler in 1995. Actually, 1995. And then in 1996, they acquired Charles Barkley from the Phoenix Suns. And so they had a big three of Hakeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, and Charles Barkley. And they were seen as a force in the West and that they were going to do really well and be a title contender, which I would say that they were. They got to, in the 1 year that actually they played together 2 years, but their best year as a trio was the 1996 to 1997 season. They got to Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals against the Jazz. Nearly got to the finals. We would have been able to see the ever talked about but never seen Rockets versus Bulls finals matchup, which I think would have been really cool because you have gotten to see a lot of great talent on the floor, a lot of Hall of Famers. You have gotten to see the three from Houston, which would have been interesting because Barkley and Clyde had already lost to Michael in the finals, and Hakeem probably felt like he had something to prove because everyone only said that he got his titles because Jordan retired. So three guys with something to prove versus arguably the greatest dynasty of modern times, which would be the Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan, Pippen, and Rodman. But so yeah, I'd say that that's the first incarnation because they got three all-star players and two of them were traded for, so I'd say that constitutes a super team. And so the first incarnation, I would say, or the first idea of a super team was three aging guys all get together in the back end of their careers and say, hey, let's try and win a title. Three guys, maybe let's say 33 and older, I would say, because none of them were really in their primes anymore. Barkley was on his way out, never even averaged 20 points a game with Houston. Hakeem had really dropped down to about 20 and 12 a game by the time that this had happened, or like 19 and 11. And Clyde Drexler was good for about 20 a game, but was well past his prime years where he could put up like 28 a game. So they are all past their primes at this point definitively. And the other incarnation of this was when Clyde Drexler retired and the lockout happened. The Rockets actually acquired Scottie Pippen, and for a year they played with Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley, and Scottie Pippen. Again, the idea was three stars, well past their prime, but still got enough talent to compete. This incarnation of the Rockets did not do well. They lost in the first round of the playoffs, and Scottie Pippen and Charles Barkley had a big feud and did not like each other. And so that particular super team didn't work out, but it was, I would say, the first incarnation, or the first idea of a super team, or the first permissible idea was three guys past their prime all getting together, giving it one last push to get to the finals. And obviously it did not work because they lost in the Western Conference Finals in their best season, but that was the first idea of it. So now moving on to what I would call the second incarnation of the super team, which went down in 2003, was when the Los Angeles Lakers acquired Karl Malone and Gary Payton. So this was a similar idea to what the Rockets did, adding two stars definitively past their prime, who were all-star level players but were past their prime and basically looking to get one last title. And, well, in the case of Gary Payton and Karl Malone, get their first title, but they were trying to wring one last drop out of the rag to win a title, but they just couldn't make it happen in Los Angeles either. But a lot of people would go back and say, well, Karl Malone and Gary Payton were trash players by the time they got to Los Angeles, but I would very much disagree. The season before each of them got to Los Angeles, they were still doing well. Karl Malone was putting up 21 and 9 for the Jazz the prior season, and Gary Payton was putting up 21 and 8 for Milwaukee and Seattle. He had played for both teams the previous season. So I don't think that they were washed up by any means. Their scoring averages did go down because they were playing with Shaq and Kobe, one of the highest scoring duos in NBA history. But I don't think that they were washed up. I just think that they were at the very back end of their careers and really each had about one more good season. But this is probably one of the most underachieving teams of all time because they lost to the Detroit Pistons in the NBA Finals with probably for sure the two best players on the court, and you could argue 4 of the 6 best players on the court, really, I would say. But, you know, I don't know. I feel like that was just a really good team that lost, and I was surprised. But it was another level of the super team in that you had 2 players in their prime, and you added 2 older stars, which is where our first incarnation was adding 1 star to a team that already had adding 2 older stars to a team that already had 1 older star. This was taking stars in their prime and adding older stars. So we see more talent level in this case, but still not to where we are today, but still coming along and getting further and closer to that. So our next incarnation of the super team, which is I would really say where the modern idea of it was born, was in 2007 when the Boston Celtics acquired Ray Allen via trade from the Sonics, and they acquired Kevin Garnett from the Minnesota Timberwolves. And so what this was not acquiring players who are definitively past their prime, but just acquiring players who are in the second half of their prime. Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett were both still all-star level players. Kevin Garnett was 31 when he got to Boston, and I think Ray Allen was around 30. So, and Paul Pierce, I think, was also 30. So they were not past their primes whatsoever. Each was still putting up all-star numbers and still going to a new number of all-star games. I'm pretty sure each of them went to at least around 4 all-star games while with Boston. So they still were in their primes. So this is where we see a huge leap in the evolution of the super team, and it goes from just adding stars who are giving it one last shot to adding guys who still have plenty left in the tank and can still compete for titles. So I think if you look at the first 2 incarnations, it would really be like if today adding Charles Barkley for the Rockets would be like if today you added Carmelo Anthony to a team. He's not a star player anymore, but he still has that reputation, and maybe if he just gave it his all, could give you one last spectacular season. But really, he's not that player that he once was. But still has something left. Still has name recognition, and people just assume talent with his name, even though it's not all there still. That's like those first 2 incarnations, I would say, with acquiring. Let's see here. For the Rockets, it was Pippen, Barkley, and Drexler, and for the Lakers, it was Malone and Payton. So that's how I would describe that in today's NBA if you're trying to think of that. Whereas acquiring Ray Allen and Kevin Garnett for the Celtics in 2007 would be like if a team acquired, I'm trying to think of an example right now, let's see here, a perennial all-star who's around 30, which would be like Kevin Love. You know, Kevin Love still has probably a good 4 seasons left as like a perennial all-star, I'd say, or someone around that talent level. You know, maybe let's see here. Russell Westbrook is 30 this year, so I wouldn't say Garnett was as talented as Westbrook is, or had as much left in the tank, but you get the idea. A player that still has plenty of years left, that's what they were getting when they got Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen. So moving on from that, the fourth incarnation of the super team, I would say, was the Los Angeles Lakers in 2012 when they added Dwight Howard and Steve Nash. So this is when we take another huge leap, and I know what you're thinking. The Miami Heat chronologically came before this, but in the evolution standpoint, I'd say that this is the next rung because what the Heat did completely changed everything. But when the Lakers made this move, even though it was after the Heat, it was more in the mold of what the Celtics did or the teams before that did, which was also the Los Angeles Lakers. So when they added Steve Nash, they knew he was well past his prime. And in having Artest, Pau Gasol, and Steve Nash, these were all guys who I think that you could say they were trying to get the last ring out of the rag with. Artest really didn't have much left at this point. Steve Nash really didn't have much left. And Pau Gasol, he still has a decent amount of seasons left at this point. He's still playing now 6 years later after this move was made. But he really was past the heart of his prime, I'd say. He was 11 years in already and was on the decline, I think you could fairly say, without it being an insult. So 3 of your players were the guys that you're getting the last ring out of the towel with, who are, I guess you would say, talented guys, but definitively former All-Stars. But what they did different was, for the first time, they added a superstar who wasn't on the back half of his career and was in the heart of his prime or even still ascending with his game. I think for Dwight, you would probably say that he was right when they added him. He was at the height of his game, wasn't going to get any better, but was like in the middle of the best part of his career. Now, he did have a back injury when he got to Los Angeles, so that changed a lot. But with this Lakers team, I think you would say Kobe was still in his prime at this point. This was probably the last year of Kobe's prime. He averaged 27 a game, and it was right before all the injuries hit him. So this was the last season that he was at the top of his game, an MVP level player. Dwight had the back injuries, but was still at the peak of his game, I think you'd say. And then you have 3 stars below that who are former stars and still have a little bit of juice left, but not much. This was a failed super team in that they did not do well in the playoffs, got swept in the first round. But it's an evolution in that you're getting one player who's in his prime. So the next team, which I would say is the 5th incarnation of the super team, is the Miami Heat in 2010. They added an all-star in Chris Bosh, and he was in the heart of his prime, or still ascending, you might even say. And they added a 25-year-old LeBron James, who definitely was not at his prime yet, and was definitely still ascending. And so this is the big change in that they added 2 superstars who were still ascending. So no team before this had done that. All the teams I've talked about, they either added 1 star in his prime, which was Dwight, or they added 2 stars who were well past their prime or in the second half of their prime on the decline. So the Heat really changed everything when they did this. It also really started the free agency thing, because before this, the Lakers had traded for Nash and traded for Dwight Howard, and before that, you have the Celtics trading for Ray Allen and trading for Kevin Garnett. But this was really when free agency became a legitimate option for gaining traction and gathering all-star players. And I think that this is probably, I don't want to say the most defining super team incarnation, but I'd say maybe this and the Boston Celtics in 2007 are the most defining changes to the whole format of the super team and the concept of the super team. So the 6th incarnation, I would say, was the Warriors adding Kevin Durant, I should say, in 2016. So now I said that the Warriors weren't a super team before, but when you add the 2nd best player in the league, I think that via free agency, I think that makes you a super team when you already had the, arguably at that point, he was about the best player in the league, Steph Curry. So when you have 2 out of the 3 best players in the league, I think that you would fairly say that you're a super team. 4 all-stars total who are in the heart of their primes. I don't think you can argue it's not a super team at that point. So this is the next evolution in that you already basically have the best team in the league. Not the clear-cut best team, but I think you'd say the most talented team, adding arguably the best player in the game. That's another level up that I don't think that anyone really saw coming. And I think it's different because it's also a guy who's right in the heart of his prime. He's not on the back end of his career like Garnett and Ray Allen were. He's not out of his prime like Barkley and Scottie Pippen were on the Rockets. He is and was in the heart of his prime when he came to the Warriors. And so the seventh incarnation of the super team is also the Warriors, and that is where you add a superstar to an already existent super team. So the Warriors, I'd say, with Durant are obviously a super team, and then they added a superstar to that. So I don't know what you call that, a super duper team, but now they have 5 all-stars in their prime on their team. They can start the all-star team at once, basically, which no team has ever done, had 5 guys on their team coming off of all-star seasons. I think this is maybe what we're going to see as, like, I don't want to say the final incarnation of the super team, but I don't think it can get much more ridiculous than this unless literally all all-stars, like 15 all-stars, sign for the vets minimum and play on one team together. I think that's the only other possible incarnation. But this is about as far as it'll go, I think, before the league steps in and changes something. So I think what you've seen is the change was when you go through these incarnations. At the beginning, it was guys who are basically on their last legs, trying for one more last run. And then it changed to guys who are looking to maybe win 2 or 3 titles together in Boston. And then it changed to guys in Miami trying to win 4 or 5 titles together. And then that sort of carried on to the Warriors, who are probably trying to look to win about 5 rings together, I'd say. But it went from guys who thought that it was fair because they didn't have much left to guys wanting to avoid criticism, so they are forming super teams. Like, I don't think anyone criticized Barkley for joining Hakeem in Houston. I don't think anyone criticized Karl Malone and Gary Payton for going to the Lakers. But I think since then, you might have seen some more flack come about because, you're not going to see flack for the Celtics because that was trades, but you're going to see flack for all these free agency moves. Obviously, LeBron and Bosh got flack. Obviously, Durant got flack. Obviously, DeMarcus Cousins is going to get flack. Any teams or players that do this going forward are going to get a lot of harassment about it because people don't like it very much. So do I think that this is good for the players? I think that if you want to win championships and that's your ultimate goal, yes, it's good for you. I think that if you're trying to build a reputation as an honorable dude that does the things the hard way and earns everything, I don't think that this is the way to do it. So it's really about what the player wants, and if they care about the money, they're probably not going to form a super team because $5 million a year for DeMarcus Cousins isn't great, but so be it. He probably cares more about a ring than the additional money right now. So, you do whatever you want to do. And a narrative that I really don't like in this whole super team thing is when people are always reiterating, he's a grown man, he can do whatever he wants. Like, I don't like that people keep mentioning that because that's a given. Every human being on earth can do whatever they want. That's obvious. So when people bring that up as like a main point of an argument for why it's okay that Durant did that, I don't think that that's valid because that's obvious. It's just restating the obvious because obviously anybody can do what they want. I thought this 10 years ago. Why doesn't let's see here. I don't know who was a free agent around 2009, but even I thought, like, when LeBron went to the Heat, I was thinking to myself, well, why doesn't all the free agents just go there? Why doesn't Joe Johnson just sign for $2 million and go there because he was a free agent that year? Why doesn't Carlos Boozer just sign for $3 million and go there? And LeBron and Wade and Bosh all just sign for $2 million so they can form a great super team and have a ton of good players. Like, obviously they can all do what they want, but it's about being competitive at some point. So do I think it's good for the owners? No, because I think the small markets like San Antonio and Charlotte and teams like that are going to get squeezed out because they just can't compete with a team like the Warriors, and the fan base just knows automatically they won't be in contention ever. You know, OKC may think that they have a shot, but they're really just delusional if they think that they'll be a first or second round team. I don't see them getting that far. Small market, the fan base will lose interest. So I guess you'd say from from an owner's perspective, most of them will not like it unless they're one of the 2 to 3 teams that is a super team in the league. Is it good from a league perspective as far as competitiveness? I don't know. It really depends on who you ask. You know, the ratings were up for the finals last year, 7% from the year before, and that was on top of the year before that. So ratings are growing for the finals, but regular season ratings are down quite a bit, I would say. But the playoffs are up because people are interested to see if David can beat Goliath. But the regular season is pretty irrelevant now, which is an interesting topic for another video possibly later on, is whether the regular season has become irrelevant because the super teams are forming and it's a given who will get to the playoffs essentially. But that's for another day. But I would say in general for the league, it's not good, it's not bad. I'd say from a talking perspective, like on TV shows, it's really good for them because it gives them something to talk about and it generates attention for the NBA. But I don't think it generates money necessarily, in that people aren't going to watch games more. They actually will probably watch games less if there's a super team. They'll watch the individual teams' games, but like, you know, now the Pelicans probably will get a decent amount of viewers going away from them because they just lost an all-star, arguably superstar in the heart of his prime, you know, or when Cleveland lost LeBron, their ratings and revenue went way down. Same for Toronto. So it's really hard to say whether or not it's good or bad for the league, because it does generate a lot of attention and interest, like on talk shows like on ESPN or Fox News, or Fox Sports. But you know, I find it really interesting. I like talking about it, hearing people's opinions and discussing what it means and who would win, you know, like the 80s Lakers versus the 2017-18 Warriors and stuff like that, or the Miami Heat of 2012 versus the Boston Celtics of 2007 before injuries set in is an interesting debate. But yeah, I guess I'll go out and say I personally don't mind it. I think it's really interesting. I always like to see the league getting shaken up and seeing player movement. I am in favor of player mobility. I think it really makes the league a lot more interesting. But it is also good occasionally when you get guys like Paul George staying where they are and being a little more loyal. Although he was not loyal to Indiana, he was loyal to OKC. So that's all I got for this video, guys. I hope you found it interesting, me going through the different incarnations of the super teams, how they've changed, what I think of them, what my definition is, what I think it means for the players, the league, and the owners, and just the current state of affairs. I don't think the NBA is ruined by the DeMarcus Cousins to the Warriors move. I think it makes it interesting. And, you know, who knows? Maybe Steph Curry in Game 1 pulls a Gordon Hayward and is out for the whole year. Then that becomes a really interesting race for the title. You never know what's going to happen, and the league is constantly changing. So don't worry. If you really don't like this, come back in 3 years. Steph Curry will be 34 and the Warriors will be on their way out. Alright guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you disagree or have anything interesting to say, comment down below, and I'd love to hear from you. Have a good day. Bye.